This new Labour scandal is so wild. The allegations are just something else. Now, I know you're probably getting a little bit confused about which scandal is which, but this is a new scandal. It involves accusations involving key Labour figures trying to discredit journalists, investigating Keir Starmer's deceitful rise to power, using a report from a PR firm which sought to discredit them by suggesting they were part of a Russian conspiracy or relied on emails hacked by Russia. This is the sort of behaviour you would expect from a dictatorship. Not an exaggeration. In democracies, you're not supposed to get mainstream political parties hiring firms to dig up dirt on journalists scrutinising you, dirt which smears them as being potentially linked to hostile foreign powers. Now, don't worry, everyone. A Cabinet Office minister implicated is being investigated over it. Guess who's investigating the Cabinet Office minister? The Cabinet Office. Brilliant stuff. This centres on an outfit called Labour Together. Sounds really inclusive, doesn't it? Warm and cuddly. It is none of those things. It was supposedly, or is, a think tank, which Keir Starmer's former chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, was a director of. That's right. The same Morgan McSweeney who had to resign over the appointment of his mentor, Peter Mandelson, as UK ambassador to the US, despite his links to the late paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Plot twist. This so-called think tank was actually a blunt instrument to crush the left and allow Keir Starmer to take over the Labour Party after a leadership campaign which was a pack of lies designed to con the Labour membership. So what Labour Together did is basically spent vast sums of money trying to find out the right messaging, lies, which could be used to dupe Labour members into voting for a right-wing candidate who was pretending to be left-wing. Now, it was fined just over £14,000 by the Electoral Commission after failing to declare £730,000 in donations between 2017 and 2020. Easily done, guys. Who amongst us? They said it was an administrative error. What it did mean, this very unfortunate administrative error, is people didn't know that the likes of the businessman Trevor Chin and hedge funder Martin Taylor were bankrolling this organisation. Would have been quite useful information. From 2023, they had another director called Josh Simons, who is now a Cabinet Office minister, being investigated by the Cabinet Office. We'll come on to him because he really is something. A key victim of this smear campaign is the journalist Paul Holden. He's an independent left-wing journalist who wrote the pithily titled book about Starmer, unbelievably well-researched, called The Fraud, who I've interviewed him twice on this channel. In that book, he exposed what Labour Together had been up to. Now, as two journalists uncovered on the Democracy for Sale blog, Labour Together hired this controversial PR firm, as it's described, called APCO Worldwide, and paid them at least 30 grand, not a small amount of money, to investigate journalists who were trying to uncover how the undeclared funding bankrolled Keir Starmer's duplicitous leadership campaign. Their aim to investigate the journalists and identify their sources. Their targets included Paul Holden, as well as Andrew Feinstein, another journalist who stood against Keir Starmer in his constituency in 2024, got huge numbers of votes, by the way, as well as journalists like the Sunday Times' Gabriel Pogrond and Harry York and the Guardian's Henry Dyer. They compiled a 58-page report, this PR firm investigating them. Now, the APCO briefing suggested, without as Democracy for Sale notes without evidence, that one potential source of the story was a Russian or Chinese hack of the Electoral Commission, and that some of the documents were then shared with other senior journalists and Labour figures with the intention of discrediting the story investigating Labour Together. Well, now this has made it to the Sunday Times, after the brilliant work already of these independent journalists I have to say I went through, who say this forms the report formed the basis of a whispering campaign against their journalists. The day after the article they wrote was published, examining Labour Together, Josh Simons commissioned APCO to look into it, and Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's chief of staff, was, we are told, aware of the decision. Apparently the report was codenamed Operation Cannon and marked private and confidential. I don't know, it's just, I've often said these people think they're in West Wing without the idealism. And you hear stuff like that and you kind of think, that's kind of right. And yes, the report suggested they were potentially part of a Russian conspiracy. The report said, without evidence, the likeliest culprit, as the source, is the Russian state or proxies of the Russian state. The report also, we are told, included baseless claims about Pogrund's faith, upbringing, and personal and professional relationships. It referenced the fact he's Jewish, quoting a supposed Sunday Times source who alleged there was an odd mismatch between his faith and what they falsely described as his political and ideological position. This is so mad. This is madness. They said his reporting on topics like the royal family could be seen as destabilising to the UK and also in the interest of Russia's strategic foreign policy objectives. I mean, to be honest, I think the British royal family are more than capable of destabilising themselves without any foreign involvement. The statement released by Josh Simons claims APCO strayed beyond their brief. He says, I was surprised and shocked to read the report extended beyond the contract by including unnecessary information of Gabriel Pogrund. I asked for this information to be removed before passing the report to GCHQ, that's the intelligence agency. No other British journalists were investigating any document I or Labour together ever received. That's what he says. Now, as I've said, he's a Cabinet Office Minister being investigated by the Cabinet Office. As Democracy for Sale, do follow them, they're doing brilliant stuff, also revealed the wife of Keir Starmer's former head of comms, Paul Ovenden, who was forced to resign over disgusting explicit text messages about Labour MP Diane Abbott, knew about this investigation. That's Kate Forrester, who ran APCO London's office at the same time it was being hired by Labour Together to do the report. She sat on the advisory board of Labour Together. See, it's all joining together. And Paul Ovenden, by the way, was felled because of the work of Paul Holden in his book. Now, Democracy for Sale asks why they would do something so risky, this crew, given Starmer was a shoo-in as Prime Minister. Why blow a load of money investigating journalists? It's a totally mad thing to do. And their journalist, Peter Gagan, thinks it may be because, as he says, these journalists were onto a crucial part of the Labour Together story, one that had gone almost unnoticed but was absolutely central to its mission and its success. Hundreds of thousands of pounds in undeclared political donations. Now, he notes there's no evidence that the material about Labour Together comes from a hack, but he notes the claim stopped other media outlets reporting on the story. He also asks who paid for such a vast sum of money to go on the report. I'd love to hear that myself as well. Now, the Electoral Commission haven't released their report into Labour Together, which, as Paul Holden and others are demanding, they obviously should do for total transparency. The PR industry's main watchdog, the Public Relations and Communications Association, is itself now investigating APCO worldwide. Let's listen to John McDonnell on this, one of the only decent Labour MPs left.
I wrote to the General Secretary of the Labour Party and said that I think this warrants an investigation because if any of this is accurate, it's really shocking. The reply, and I tried to get the Labour Party to be ahead of the game because I thought at least what the Labour Party could do, so acknowledge there might be a problem here and then announce that there's going to be an independent investigation, and that would have at least been able to get somewhere near the truth. I got a reply from the General Secretary that said this isn't a Labour organisation, even though I said, look, it's managed and controlled by Labour Party members, quite senior Labour Party members. And I was referred to the complaints department about individual members of the party. And I said, that doesn't meet the seriousness of this case.
Just spell that out, would you, John? Because you raised Russia, you raised Iran. For people who may think this is all complicated, murky goings on in Westminster, are you saying that we are seeing or have seen the sort of behaviour that you would expect to see from an undemocratic regime in its attitude to journalists?
That's the allegation being levelled against Labour Together. And so you know what it's like as a journalist. If someone damages your reputation, it could be career ending, couldn't it? You could have your reputation damaged and actually it damages your potential as a future journalist. And so I thought this is serious allegations. The Labour Party should get on top of it at the earliest stage. And I've written 4 times now to the General Secretary of the Labour Party, including to Keir Starmer, to say this is serious, launch an investigation. But that's not happened.
What a joke. For the Labour Party to wash their hands of this scandal, given they didn't directly run Labour Together, which is clearly the outfit of Starmer's allies. What does our Prime Minister have to say about this?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has also said today that he didn't know anything about the investigation regarding Labour Together, and it absolutely needs to be looked into. Labour Together, a think tank with close links to senior figures in the Labour Party, has been accused of paying a PR firm to investigate journalists reporting on its funding. Speaking earlier, the Prime Minister said the Cabinet Office would be looking into the allegations.
There will be a Cabinet Office investigation into the allegations, and quite right to. And so that is already in place. I didn't know anything about this investigation, and it absolutely needs to be looked into. So the Cabinet Office will be establishing the facts.
Poor old Starmer. He doesn't seem to know much about the people who installed him in power. I would like to know myself what he knew about Labour Together, what he thought Labour Together was doing, what role he thought they were playing in his rise to power. I just want to share an example. I promised to do this, of what Josh Simons is like. This was from a couple of years ago before the general election.
My main concern with Rwanda is not actually the human rights implications of it and the focus of this report. My main concern is that it's a complete waste of money and it won't work. It won't stop the boats. You know, that was the thing that Rishi said, judge me by, stop the boats. He's failed. Yes. He keeps failing. And meanwhile, he's spending £8 million a day and so far 400 million quid. So my problem with Rwanda is that it won't work. So the hard question is, what are you going to do instead? And I think that while the Conservatives say that they are being tough on the borders and beefing up the policing and so on, I have seen no real evidence that that is in fact what they are doing with the kind of commitment and clarity that they need to. I mean, you know, why don't you send the smuggler gangs and put them on the barge that, you know, has been set aside for the asylum seekers to do it? And then, you know, ship the barge up to the north of Scotland for all I, you know, who cares?
So pathetic. Just an example of a man who's got no obvious principle, no obvious moral core, trying to construct an argument showing, oh, look, I'm so tough on immigration, and then ends up insulting Scotland, causing a big scandal at the time. You see, these people think they're so clever. They think they're political masterminds, but just look at the train wreck that they've managed to very carefully construct. Let's just circle back a bit, finally. The Post-Armour journalist David Aronovich says, this is a truly depressing story. I honestly wonder what some people are smoking when they do stuff like this. Because A, it's a shit thing to do. B, it can't do you any good anyway. And C, you will get found out. What could have led Starmer's crew to believe they had some sort of impunity? Here's what happened. Morgan McSweeney and his faction set out to crush the left in the Labour Party. They did so through deceit and duplicity, but the media hates the left and sees crushing the left as good politics. So the media had no objections to what they were up to and didn't bother scrutinising what they were up to, because this was just good, sound politics. Getting rid of all those lefties. But now as the Starmer government falls apart, we can have what some call the great noticing, where all of a sudden all of their terrible behaviour is fair game to be reported on long after the event. And in this case, they made a mistake of not just going after left-wing independent journalists. They stuck to that. I've got no doubt this would not be a scandal. But they also went after mainstream journalists working for the Sunday Times. But the truth is this. The Starmer project is dead. It has fallen apart. And it has been exposed for what it is with its rotten core. But I think when it comes to the Starmer project, there's a lot more to come. Please like and subscribe with your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on a terrible media ecosystem on the whole, I would say, at patreon.com/OWDaz84. Share the video, like, subscribe. I'll speak to you in a bit.